Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're most pleased and honored to be able to interview the candidates from the 1st Congressional District of the state of Idaho for the November election. In the 1st Congressional District, it is an open seat, and therefore much attention is given to it, but not only here but around the country. Today we're pleased to welcome to our program Bill Sali. He is the Republican candidate for the 1st District of the U.S. Representative from Idaho. Our guest is an attorney. He has a BA degree in economics from Boise State University. He holds a law degree from the University of Idaho, and he has been serving in the Idaho State House of Representatives for the past 16 years, and he is from Kuna, Idaho. Mr. Sali, welcome. We're happy to have you on our program.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
Mr. Sali, the panel member, Erna Reinhardt, who's Director of Public Relations at Idaho College, and I have a series of questions, and we're going to try to get through all of them if we can. We have some in foreign policy and some on domestic issues. Let's start with foreign policy, please. Following the 9/11 terrible crime that we were a victim of, the President of the United States and Congress declared war on terrorists around the world immediately afterwards, of course. And the first action was to go into Afghanistan and to overthrow the Taliban government that had provided a haven for Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. In your opinion, after the overthrow of the Taliban government in Afghanistan, have we, in your opinion, given sufficient attention to Afghanistan, including more work to capture Osama bin Laden and the al-Qaeda, and also there's some resurgence of the Taliban? Just want you to be able to talk about how would you recommend that we go about dealing with Afghanistan further?
Well, first of all, I think all of us around this table have to admit that there's an awful lot about what's going on over there that we don't know, yes. and much of it happens in briefings that citizens don't get to engage in. So, having said that, and I just want to qualify
sure.
The comments that I will make, I think that there has to be a lot of credence given to the judgment of those who are involved, do have those briefings. The decision to work in Afghanistan to dethrone the Taliban, I absolutely believe was the proper one. The continuing hunt for the Osama bin Laden and his cronies, I think is the right step. Whether we have done enough there or not, I think that's a tough judgment for us to make. I guess I would tend to support the president and the members of Congress who have supported the funding for that the levels that they've arrived at probably are the correct levels. We have gotten a government that's been raised up in Afghanistan that seems to be doing a pretty good job. The issue of the insurgents, and this will come in to play with your question with Iraq, I'm sure, as
yes.
well. The problem with the insurgents is, we've got to recognize that there are a group of people in the world who don't like us because we're Americans, and that they are, in effect, hunting us. And they will do that to anyone who doesn't agree with them. Their leaders have said that. This is a very different kind of war. There's no return address, if you will. There's no capital of terroristville. There's no place you can go to take out their leadership. And so, as the president has aptly described, this is a very tough job where you have to go track those folks down as best you can and find them one by one.
Thank you. Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to the show, Mr.
Thank
Sali. This is a two-part question, and
Okay.
it is on Iraq. The first part of the question is, did you support the invasion of Iraq? And the second part is, now that we're there, what do you propose we do to stop the sectarian violence, stabilize Iraq, and avoid civil war?
Well, first of all, I did support the president and the decision to go to Iraq. Once again, we're back to those briefings that you get. Based on the information he had at the time, I think he made the absolute correct call. There were 18 or however many different resolutions the UN had passed. Saddam Hussein's intent on disobeying those and thumbing his nose, essentially, everyone who was involved. I personally don't believe that we can rely on the United Nations to go get that work done in a way that addresses the needs of the United States. So I think the President went to a certain point, he gave a timeline, and he acted. And that's the way that we ought to react in the national or in the worldwide community, the international community. When you talk about what is our job in Iraq, I don't think our job is to end sectarian violence over there because I don't think it's ever going to end. Our job and the goal that the President has set out is to establish a government that can take care of its own business over there. We're, I think, very close to getting that done. Of course, their leader came to the Congress a few weeks ago and begged us to stay. It would be a terrible mistake for us to disregard his very serious request and pull out of Iraq at this point. I think it would just be a lapse of our duty within the international community.
Thank you.
Thank you for your very precise answers. One more foreign policy one. Okay. It's all about the Middle East, isn't it? What recommendations do you have with the dispute in the Middle East between Israel and her neighbors, certainly the Palestinian question and what just happened in southern Lebanon? And again, you're talking about, you know, the briefings others have, but isn't that also really tied to this whole conflict that we're having? That's a major issue.
Well, I think that the U.S. and the world community needs to bring increasing pressure to bear on other countries in the Middle East to recognize a couple of things about Israel. First of all, that it has a right to defend its citizens and a right to defend itself and an obligation to defend its citizens. And number two, that there is a place for Israel on the world map. Until those things are, until that becomes a part of the thinking of all the other countries in the Middle East, we're going to continue to have violence over there. So I think that those are an absolute essential for the world community to be working on the rest of the community in the Middle East. And as an example, the relationship with Egypt has been fairly stable for a number of years now, and it is because of that type of relationship where, entering into the accord that brought that peace there, there was a recognition that Israel on the other side of that equation had a place on the world map.
And we don't have time, but the complication with Iran, the President Iran and his threat to try to eliminate Israel is also part of that formula, I'm sure. We're going to turn now to domestic issues. Erna, if you...
Our first question, Mr. Sali, is on immigration policies. Mm-hmm. So one of the most hotly debated issues today is our immigration policies. And what are your proposals for addressing this issue? If you become a member of Congress, what immigration reform policies would you recommend, including the security of our borders?
I see this border security and immigration issue as absolutely linked together. You can't address one without the other. And I view our border security issues as a matter of national security. And I say that because while the focus has largely been on those who are coming here to work in our country, the discussion about whether they should have access to our social services and those kinds of things, the impact to our education system, impact to our judicial system. I think it's a national security issue because along with those folks, there are terrorists, I believe, and drug cartel operatives and gang members, certainly, that we know are coming by the thousands across our borders in places with just impunity. To address that, and because it's a national security issue, I believe we need to deal with our borders and secure them immediately. The amnesty issue, which is closely linked to that, because it's a national security issue, we cannot grant blanket amnesty, because if we do, we will be saying to those same terrorists, those same drug cartel operatives, those same gang members, your penalty for sneaking across our border in violation of our law and intending to do harm to our families and our countries is now we're going to make you a legal resident. That's just absolutely irrational. It does not address that national security problem. Now, there are a lot of issues to deal with in the immigration debate. And let me say, we are, as a nation, standing flat-footed without the resources, unprepared to deal with our immigration issue. But the place that we have to start, I believe, and we must start immediately, is to secure our borders, not grant amnesty, and then we're going to have a whole lot of wrangling to get through the other issues.
Thank you. The next issue is another one you and others have spoken to a lot. For a number of years, we have witnessed a growing deficit each year that's added to our national debt. And of course, the national debt is rather large, to say the least. Because of this soaring national debt, we're now forced to borrow large amounts of money from other countries, such as China and Japan and South Korea, in addition to what we borrow from American citizens. What do you think that the members of the House and the Senate of the U.S. Congress should do to address this problem?
Well, first of all, I support a balanced budget amendment, and I will work for its passage. You know, in my house, we can't live on deficit spending. When I was in the Idaho legislature, we didn't live on deficit spending. Congress can't do it either. It is a burden that we are saddling ourselves and our progeny with that it's just inexcusable and unacceptable. Now, how do we work out of that? You know, you just have to start. That's the most important part of this. Last year, Congress spent 20% of its budget in deficit. That's inexcusable, and it must stop. How will we do that? When the Contractor with America was proposed in '94, there was a 7-year deficit reduction plan. I think they made it in '98. It certainly is doable. It's not something we're going to work out of within 1 year, I don't believe. But we certainly need to get started, and that needs to be a priority within Congress.
Thank you.
Our next question is about
And let me add one thing on that point.
You bet.
The answer for the deficit is to cut spending. It's not to increase taxes to pay for the deficit. And that's a big distinction between me and my opponent. I will cut spending to get the deficit taken care of.
Great, thank you. Due to our growing dependence on foreign oil, which has resulted in rising energy and gas prices, what do you think are some solutions to this problem, and do you have any recommendations for alternative sources of energy?
Well, first of all, we have seen some effects of the market in the last few days where someone was saying, and I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and they were saying that there was some place in the country where gas was selling for $1.35, and it was some kind of a price war. So that's not the market price, but yeah, we could all line up there.
What planet are they on?
Yeah. but clearly there are market forces at issue. That, you know, it's the combination of the instability in the Middle East with the taking production out of the pipeline in the world market, coupled with the Katrina, the effects of that, and our refining capacity being reduced. Those things are starting to come back around now. We got an announcement by ExxonMobil the other day. Sakhalin Island over in Russia, they're pumping 1 million barrels a day of crude oil, 15 million cubic feet of natural gas. There's, it seems, some real movement in drilling on the Outer Continental Shelf in Florida, where there'll be more gas, natural gas that will come on board. I support drilling in ANWR. We do need to become independent for our energy needs in this country. In terms of alternative energy supply, there are so many opportunities out there. If you look at forecasts, there's room for alternative energy like wind and solar and some ethanol and those fuels. But if you look at the capability to produce those, it's they're people who are experts believe that wind might get to 2 or 3% of our total energy demand. Should we promote those things? Sure, we should. Our goal needs to be on energy, independence, and our policy within this country has to be, I believe, to develop some of our natural resources that are here. And there are so many opportunities there. I was speaking with the Forest Products Group yesterday, and they were talking about some of their new technology that's actually cooking crude oil out of biomass, timber in the forest. 40% of the mass of every tree in the forest is crude oil. Oh my gosh. And if you can figure out a way to get that into our gas tanks, it would be a great thing for the state of Idaho, certainly.
Coal, they're doing it with coal.
The coal, the oil shale project up in Canada is coming online. So there are a lot of market factors, I think, that are going to affect things, but as a goal, the United States has got to become less dependent on foreign energy.
And if you find out where that $1.35 gas is, let me know.
We'll let everyone know.
Okay.
Okay, you'll be the first to know.
Yeah, we'll call you when we get there and are at the pump, okay?
The next question is on education, and as you well know, for many, many years, education funding always left to the states and local governments, and that's changed some in recent years. What do you perceive to be the role of the federal government in public education as illustrated by such policies as No Child Left Behind?
Well, this is an area where I take some departure from the president. I believe that education is a local matter, and I don't think it's productive for Idaho students for us to have someone sitting in a very expensive office in Washington, D.C. determining what's right for kids in Kuhn, Idaho. There are economic reasons why I'm not sure it's a good idea for the state of Idaho to engage in that. One person was telling me that something like 4% of their budget for an Idaho school came from No Child Left Behind money, and they figured that it might take 5% of their budget to meet those demands. It's a losing proposition. Now, the idea that we ought to have, standards for our school children, it's a laudable goal. And in fact, I attended Boise Public Schools, and when I was there, we had standards, and we called them tests and grades. And at any time, I could go to my teacher, and I could find out, and I did. I could find out how I was doing, and I could work to improve my grades. There's nothing magic about a person who works in Washington, D.C. in a big office to teach a kid how to read and write and do arithmetic. We can do that locally. We just need to work on that as a state, and I don't think the federal government really adds anything to the mix.
Okay, thank you.
Based on recent revelations that some powerful lobbyists have engaged in illegal activity, which has resulted in some criminal prosecutions, what should Congress do to control or regulate the influence of lobbyists?
I think the real answer is the hard work of finding out who you're electing to office. The fact that a lobbyist comes to you and makes a proposal that lacks integrity doesn't mean you have to take it. And I've never had one of those proposals, and I hope it's because my reputation says everyone knows I just wouldn't be engaged in that kind of thing. Trying to regulate lobbyists, it's a good idea. There are certain things that people can do that probably ought to be against the law. But the real answer is that unless you elect people to Congress who just won't engage in that kind of thing, there won't be enough laws that we can pass that will really deal with the situation, the mess that we'll have.
There are so many issues, and we're getting through a lot of them today, which is nice, but it's certainly another great problem and concern that American people have is the whole issue of health care. So one of the greatest concerns is the escalating cost of health care that also includes now more than 40 million Americans, including children from many of those families that have no health coverage. Mr. Sali, what do you think that we should do in the field of health care to address it? And from an inflation point of view, health care has one of the highest inflation rates compared with others. We've been fortunate in recent years not to have a lot of inflation overall, but certainly in health care that has been the case. What would you recommend that we do in this particular arena?
Now, how much time do we have?
Yeah, we need about 2 or 3 hours, right?
or days.
Yeah.
Let me give you kind of the 10,000-foot view. I'm one who believes that Medicaid and Medicare are actually some of the prime drivers in increasing health care costs. We don't have time to get into why that's true, but my answer for that is this, and we're going to cover a lot of ground here, so hang on. Our Medicaid system is a bureaucracy-driven system, okay? We have another system, a federal health care delivery system in the federal government that it's called community health centers. The Durnay Clinic here in Coeur d'Alene is one. In that system, it's grant driven. The doctor says, I apply for a grant, I want to treat these people, here's the services I'm going to provide, and they do all of the, they give all the information so that a person in the federal government says, here's your grant, then that grant is applied to a sliding fee schedule to basically subsidize those who can't pay for their care. If we took the federal layer of bureaucracy, Center for Medicaid and Medicare Studies, and by the way, you can do the same thing with part of Medicare. There's some hospitals and nursing homes and assisted living you probably can't. But if you took that layer out, our state Medicaid, you could get rid of a lot of that, the process and the claims. And most importantly, and this is the reason most providers do not like Medicaid and Medicare, is that layer of bureaucracy in their office. People who push paper around to file claims, and the provider's got to talk with the person filling out the paperwork, and then they got to file them with the person at the state, and then they got to fight with them for a while, and then they got to wait for their payment. If you get rid of all of that, we can save probably 25% of the cost of Medicaid. Now that's some pretty good money. There's an added benefit, because the way that health care is delivered in the community health center setting, they save about 20 to 30% just on the outlay for the health care. You're talking about some pretty serious money now. And that is, I believe that's the thing that's driving increases in healthcare costs, and that's too complicated to get into in the time we have here. But let me tell you what you can do with the savings, what I plan to do with savings. Number one is, I think we can actually give an increase, because this is all non-discretionary money. It's the three entitlement programs of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, all kind of tied together. I would use that, the money that we save to, we would head off that looming train wreck coming in Social Security. I think we can actually give an increase in Social Security benefits. We probably have enough money to actually reduce Medicare taxes for every person that's getting a payroll check. And the third thing that I think we can do is ramp up health savings accounts. This is personal accounts that people have, and I believe that that's the key to the future for people to have control over more of their healthcare decisions, and I think it will do great things to bring those healthcare increases under control. That's a lot of ground to cover in a very short time, but that's how I would handle it.
Our next question deals with federal public lands. What is your position on the use of federal public lands in the state of Idaho? And do you favor or oppose Congressman Mike Simpson's bill regarding the use of public lands?
The key for public lands in Idaho, I believe, is greater access for the public. If they're going to be public lands, the public should be able to use them. And really what we've seen over time is a trend where we're putting more and more people on smaller and smaller areas of public lands. With the removal of roadless areas, people don't have access to those lands anymore. I had a fascinating discussion with some fish and game officers up in Lewiston, down in Lewiston, I guess, from here, last week, and they were talking about wanting to manage the wolf population and elk herds in wilderness areas. And to do that, they wanted to be able to fly a helicopter in and land in the wilderness. And the federal government, the people were telling them, well, you can't do that because we don't allow anything motorized into the wilderness areas. That's wrong thinking. That's not what wilderness should be about. To be so exclusive that we can't even manage the game and wildlife that is there. Those are the kinds of changes I would want to make in our access for public lands. And another thing I want to try and do, and I actually was talking with Congressman Otter, I believe soon to be Governor Otter, just last night, actually. We were talking about whether there's opportunities for the state of Idaho to get into the management game for public lands that are now federally administered. If you go to forest lands that are state-owned, they're healthy. They're managed well. In fact, there are areas of the state where a forest fire will be raging on federally administered lands, get up to the state-administered land, and the fire essentially stops, or it goes down to ground level, actually, is probably the way to describe it. If there's a way to return or to give the state of Idaho more opportunities for administration of public lands, I'd be all in favor of that, because I think the state of Idaho is proven as a much better land manager than the federal government. And there are a lot of things that I think we can do. That little proposal I was talking about the our idea that the 40% of the mass of a tree is crude oil. If we develop that as an industry in the state of Idaho, it gives you the value on the land to go in and perform those forest health functions that are missing now, and it just requires too much money to be able to do it. So anyway, I think the state of Idaho could do a great job with management of public lands.
The great news is we got through all 10 of our questions, and we were hoping to, and you were very cooperative in doing so. We have about a minute and a half left, and we want to give you that opportunity to say to the voters of Idaho a message of why they should elect you to Congress.
Well, I think it's very important for people to understand that there's a real difference between Bill Sali and Larry Grant. And it's a classic liberal Democrat, conservative Republican matchup. And let's start with, for example, the deficit. As I said earlier, Larry Grant's answer for the deficit is raise taxes to take care of things that we won't be able to pay for in the future, and we'll have the deficit spent. My answer is cut spending. He's on record as supporting increases in payroll taxes. He wants to let the Bush tax cuts expire. He's in favor of the death tax. I want to get rid of the death tax permanently, not let it come back in 2 years. I want to extend and make permanent the Bush tax cuts. These are things that impact real Idahoans. A child tax credit that goes back to $500 from the $1,000 that it is today. That's $500 per child. That's a real impact on working families in the state of Idaho.
The clock has won again. It always been on the show.
Oh,
Thank you
darn
so
it.
much. Mr. Bill Sali is the Republican candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives from Congressional District 1, which the election will be on November the 7th. Mr. Sali, thank you for being with us this 30 minutes. We appreciate your taking time to do so.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll be with us again next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of
You were
North Idaho
very-
College,
very-
Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.